The story begins with a strange disease spreading all over the world. Everyone who dies suddenly comes back to life as a zombie. But these zombies are not like the ones we see in movies. They don't attack people, and some of them can even talk and act like regular humans. Some people don't like the zombies, but others believe they should be treated fairly, just like regular humans. Meanwhile, in a company called Coleman, led by Bon Coleman, they are trying to figure out how to handle this zombie outbreak. They also run a special place for zombies, where families can send their loved ones who have died and come back as zombies. But the zombies are really being studied for research. One night, two friends, Freddy and Carl, get a phone call from Carl's sister Maggie. Maggie has hacked into Coleman's system, and she tells Freddy and Carl that they need to help collect a zombie from a wealthy family's home. Freddy and Carl decide to disguise themselves as Coleman workers and go pick up the zombie. When they arrive at the house, a man invites them inside to take his father-in-law, who had died and turned into a zombie. Freddy and Carl try very hard to help the zombie stand up, but suddenly, the zombie's head falls off. Carl quickly tried to put the zombie's head back on. After getting paid by the homeowner, Carl and Freddy rushed off with the zombie. Soon after, two real workers from Coleman, Stanley and Rocco, arrived at the house. The homeowner was confused because the zombie had already been taken by other workers. Meanwhile, Freddy and Carl took the zombie to a zombie dealer named Don. Since the zombie's head had fallen off, Don only paid them half of the usual price. The next day, Freddy and Carl had breakfast with Maggie. Maggie asked for her share of the money from the zombie sale. Mikey, who was also there, got angry when he found out they didn't get much money. Freddy explained that they accidentally knocked off the zombie's head, so Don only paid half. Mikey got even angrier because Maggie had worked so hard to hack Coleman's system, and Freddy and Carl messed up. Maggie left angrily. Elsewhere, Stanley and Rocco were scolded by their boss, Hannity. Hannity was upset because they had lost 10 customers worth $25,000 in 1 month. As a result, the company decided to withhold Stanley and Rocco's salaries until they paid back the $25,000. The next day, Freddy went to pick up Carl. Carl's grandmother, Mrs. Neard, greeted Freddy at the door. Freddy entered Carl's room unexpectedly, wearing a wrestling mask, and discovered Carl was watching a live stream of a female zombie on a website. Carl got angry and told Freddy to leave. Freddy then went to see Maggie, who had just woken up. He apologized for the previous day's mess. Suddenly, Maggie saw a new zombie pickup request and told Freddy and Carl to hurry and go. After a while, Freddy and Carl finally arrived at the house to pick up the zombie. As Carl was about to go inside, Freddy told him that he liked Maggie. Freddy had even prepared a ring that he took from a zombie to ask Maggie to marry him. When Carl heard this, he got really mad and said he didn't want his sister to marry Freddy. Suddenly, someone shocked Freddy and Carl with electricity, making them faint. When they woke up, they saw that it was Stanley and Rocco, wearing masks. They tried to explain that Freddy and Carl had stolen their customers, but Freddy and Carl didn't listen. Instead, they started arguing. And Stanley, who was really upset, told Rocco to scare Freddy and Carl. But when Rocco tried to show off his weapon, he accidentally shot himself. Rocco sadly passed away. Stanley, even angrier now, punched Carl until he passed out. But when Stanley tried to punch Freddy, Freddy said that Mrs. Neard's punches were much stronger. Hearing this, Stanley had an idea. He shot Freddy until he passed out. Meanwhile, Maggie waited for hours at a restaurant for Freddy and Carl. She tried calling them, but there was no answer. When Maggie went back home, she found Freddy and Carl sleeping on the couch. She quickly woke them up. Strangely, there was a DVD remote stuck to Carl's hand, with instructions to press the button. At first, Carl didn't want to press it, but Freddy, who was curious, grabbed the remote and pressed the button. On the TV screen, they saw Stanley and Rocco, who were now zombies, kidnapping Mrs. Neard. They demanded a ransom of $50,000 by the next night, or they would hurt Mrs. Neard. Maggie, Carl, and Freddy were all scared and didn't know what to do because they didn't have that much money. Freddy then had an idea. He suggested asking Don for help because Don had lots of connections and might know a way out. The three of them rushed to see Don. When they met Don, Maggie immediately asked if he could help them find a job with a much higher salary than usual. Don agreed to help, and took them to meet his boss, Maddox. Maddox was an artist who created art using zombie bodies. Maggie, Carl, and Freddy watched a performance by Maddox, where he used zombies on stage. This was just the opening show, with the big event happening the next night, where zombies and humans would both attend. Meanwhile, Stanley and Rocco were treating Mrs. Neard very kindly. Stanley promised that they would return her once they got the money. Luckily, Mrs. Neard didn't mind and even invited Rocco to practice dancing with her. After the show, Don took Maggie, Carl, and Freddy to Maddox's room. In the room, Freddy saw a poster of a woman, which was the same woman Carl had seen earlier on a website. Carl explained that what he saw on the website was a zombie cosplaying as Zelvarella, but the poster showed the real Zelvarella, a famous actress who had passed away a long time ago. Maddox then appeared and told them that he had admired Zelvarella for a long time. Maddox had a job for them. He wanted them to steal Zelvarella's body from the graveyard. After she came back as a zombie, he would use her for the big show the next night. At first, Maddox offered to pay them $25,000 for the job. But since stealing from a famous person's grave was so risky, Carl asked for $50,000 instead. Maddox agreed, and the three of them quickly headed to the graveyard. Meanwhile, at the Coleman Company, Hannity was giving a presentation to the company leaders. He explained that there were now more zombies than humans because every time a human died, they turned into a zombie. Hannity shared his plan. He had been working on a special gas that could make zombies aggressive. If zombies became dangerous, they'd have a reason to get rid of them. Hannity wanted to test the gas during Maddox's big show, where lots of zombies and humans would gather. Hannity asked his assistant Drive West to demonstrate the gas. She sprayed it on a zombie inside a box. But instead of turning aggressive, the zombie exploded. Bond, the company's boss, was furious. He pulled Hannity aside to talk. Bond scolded Hannity for wasting so much money on a failed experiment. He decided to stop the research and move Hannity to a different department. Later that night, at the graveyard, Freddy and Carl were busy digging up a grave while Maggie kept an eye on the security cameras. Suddenly, Maggie noticed some guards heading toward the graveyard. She warned Freddy and Carl to hurry up. Carl managed to lift Zelvarella's coffin out of the ground, but when they opened it, they were shocked to see only bones inside. It was impossible to bring her back as a zombie. Before they could figure out what to do, the guards started shooting at them. The three friends quickly grabbed what they could and ran away as fast as they could. The next day, Hannity got some shocking news. Bond had died while playing on a swing. When doctors checked him, they found out that Bond, now a zombie, had suffered a serious brain injury that made him unable to talk. Standing in front of zombie Bond, Hannity announced that he would now take over the company. Meanwhile, Maggie was cleaning Carl's arm, which had been grazed by a bullet the night before, when suddenly Freddy got a call from Stanley. Stanley reminded them that they needed to bring the $50,000 that night. But then, Maggie recognized Stanley's voice. She used to work with him at the Coleman Company. Maggie told Stanley she wanted to hear her grandma's voice to make sure she was okay. While Stanley was about to let her talk to Mrs. Neard, Rocco accidentally dropped his weapon, and it went off, hitting Mrs. Neard. She died instantly. Stanley was furious at Rocco for being so careless. Soon, Mrs. Neard came back as a zombie, but surprisingly, she could still talk clearly. Stanley held the phone to Mrs. Neard so Maggie could hear her. Then, Stanley warned Maggie to bring the money that night. At that time, Maggie, Freddy, and Carl didn't know how they'd get $50,000 since the real Zelvarella couldn't be brought back to life. Then Freddy had an idea. He remembered the zombie woman from the website Carl had seen because she looked just like Zelvarella. They decided to kidnap this fake Zelvarella and give her to Maddox. Maddox would never know she wasn't the real one. Luckily, Carl, being an active member of that website, knew exactly where the fake Zelvarella lived. Moments later, Carl, Maggie, and Freddy finally arrived at the zombie massage parlor. Since Carl had a special membership with used bonuses, he got a free massage session with Jane, a zombie cosplayer who dressed up as Zelvarella. Along with the massage, Carl also received fun accessories, like a cool laser toy. While Carl went inside, Maggie and Freddy waited outside. In the massage room, Carl met Jane and told her he needed her help. Just as Carl was explaining, Maggie and Freddy shouted through the window, telling him to hurry up. Maggie asked Jane to come with them. and to their surprise, Jane was excited. She had felt trapped at the zombie massage parlor for so long and was thrilled to finally escape. The four of them quickly jumped into a car and sped away. On the road, Freddy got distracted and accidentally hit something. It turned out to be a zombie. Its body got tangled in the car's front tire. When Freddy tried to pull the zombie's leg out, the leg broke off. Frustrated, Freddy knew they were running out of time. Just then, Stanley called again, reminding them to deliver the money that night. Maggie told Stanley to meet them at Maddox's show later that evening. But suddenly, Carl noticed that Jane had disappeared. He immediately ran off to find her. Meanwhile, Hannity decided to test his zombie gas again, this time on Bond, who was already a zombie. Drive West warned Hannity that the gas wasn't ready, but Hannity was too impatient. He pressed the gas release button anyway, even though Drive West was still in the room. The gas filled the air, and Bond started to change. He became aggressive and lunged at Drive West, biting her. Soon, Drive West turned into a fierce zombie, just like Bond. Carl finally caught up with Jane, who had run away. Jane asked where Carl and the others were planning to take her. Carl explained they were taking her to meet Maddox, who was a big fan of hers. When Jane heard Maddox's name, she got excited because she knew he was a famous artist with lots of money. Feeling calmer, Jane decided not to run away anymore. Meanwhile, Freddy and Maggie were having trouble removing a zombie stuck in their car's tire. A police officer arrived, and they were worried he might arrest them. But instead, the officer offered to help. He used a tool to get rid of the zombie tangled in the car. Just as the officer finished, Carl suddenly hit him from behind, thinking the officer was there to capture them. The officer fell unconscious. Later that evening, the audience began arriving for Maddox's art show. Maggie and the others brought Jane to Maddox. Maddox was overjoyed to see Jane, thinking she was Zelvarella, his idol. While Maddox was distracted, Hannity secretly released the zombie gas into the venue. Suddenly, all the zombies in Maddox's exhibit turned aggressive and started attacking the people there. In Maddox's private room, just as he was about to hand over the promised money, a wild zombie barged in and bit him. Chaos broke out as Freddy and Maggie tried to escape from the attacking zombies. Meanwhile, Don sneaked away with a suitcase full of money. Maggie managed to defeat a zombie by smashing its head, while Carl also fought off another one. But then, Maddox turned into a zombie too. Before he could attack, Jane stepped forward and hit Maddox on the head, knocking him down for good. Outside, Don was completely confused as everything around him was in chaos. Suddenly, he was attacked by guards who had turned into wild zombies. Meanwhile, inside the elevator, Carl and his friends were puzzled about why the zombies were becoming so aggressive. When they stepped out, they were shocked to see the entire art show venue overrun by wild zombies. They turned on the TV and saw a news report calling them suspects in a terrorist attack, accusing them of making the zombies go crazy. Carl then noticed Jane was missing. Looking around, they saw Jane calmly walking away with a suitcase full of money. None of the zombies attacked her. That's when they realized the aggressive zombies weren't attacking other zombies, cause they only went after living humans. Outside, Hannity and his team began entering the venue. Inside, Freddy found a weapon and gave it to Maggie. Before they moved, Freddy apologized, admitting that he liked Maggie. Carl joined in, apologizing too, saying he didn't mind Freddy liking his sister. There, Maggie promised that if they all made it out alive, she'd agree to be Freddy's girlfriend. They started moving, but Maggie sprained her ankle, and Freddy accidentally sneezed so hard that he hit his head on his own leg and passed out. This left Carl to face the zombies alone. Suddenly, a giant zombie appeared, and Carl grabbed a chainsaw nearby to fight it off. After a tough battle, he defeated the huge zombie. Behind him, Freddy woke up and started fighting zombies, while Maggie shot at the ones coming close to her. But her gun was down to its last bullet. Just then, Hannity and his team arrived and shot down all the zombies, clearing the area. Carl, Maggie, and Freddy quickly ducked for cover. Hannity appeared, dragging Jane along. He admired how Carl and his friends had survived for so long. Suddenly, one of Hannity's men turned on him, shooting another guard and ordering Hannity to kneel. It turned out to be Stanley in disguise. Just as Stanley reached for the suitcase of money, Hannity grabbed his gun and knocked Stanley out with one swift move. At that time, Hannity wanted to get rid of Carl and his friends, blaming them for all the chaos. But Carl quickly turned on a laser pointer, blinding Hannity for a moment. Taking the chance, Freddy ran forward and defeated Hannity. But just when they thought it was over, Hannity came back as a zombie. He picked up a gun and shot Freddy in the chest. Maggie, angry and determined, grabbed a chainsaw and fought Hannity, finally defeating him. Luckily, Freddy was okay, cause the bullet was stopped by a ring in his pocket. Meanwhile, Stanley sneaked off with a suitcase of money. But on his way out, he got bitten by a wild zombie. Hurting and scared, Stanley ran off into the distance. 2 weeks later, Carl, Freddy, Maggie, and their new friends Jane, Mrs. Neard, and Rocco were enjoying breakfast together at a small diner. But outside, things weren't looking good. The streets were full of wild zombies. Everyone outside had been bitten by Stanley, who had also turned into a wild zombie. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is don't steal a zombie's head if you're bad at carrying fragile stuff, cause it might cost you half the pay and double the headache. Also, never trust a zombie cosplayer. They might walk off with all your money.